The waiting room was almost empty when Daniel Mercer looked at the clock for the fourth time. The second hand moved with a soft, irritating click. Somewhere behind the closed examination room door, a cabinet opened and shut. A nurse murmured something Daniel could not hear. Then silence returned. Elena had been inside for 20 minutes. Daniel had expected the appointment to be routine. Elena had complained of discomfort for several days, and the doctor had recommended an examination. Nothing about the morning had suggested danger. They had driven there together, spoken about dinner, and even laughed about a television show they had watched the night before. Now Daniel sat alone beneath a framed photograph of a beach, wondering why the doctor had asked him to wait outside. He remembered the doctor's words. "Mr. Mercer, we'll speak afterward." Nothing more. Daniel stared at the examination room door. When it finally opened, Elena stepped out slowly. Her face looked pale. She held her handbag tightly against her body, as though it were something she needed to protect. She avoided Daniel's eyes. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine." The answer came too quickly. Daniel stood. "What happened?" "Nothing. The doctor just asked me some questions." "What kind of questions?" Elena looked toward the reception desk. "Medical questions." Daniel studied her face. During their 7 years together, he had learned the smallest changes in her expression. The tightened jaw. The lowered eyes. The smile that appeared whenever she wanted a conversation to end. This was the last one. The doctor appeared behind her. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the doctor looked at Daniel and said, "There are a few things Elena and I need to discuss privately." Daniel frowned. "Privately?" Elena's shoulders stiffened. "Daniel, please." He stepped back, but something inside him had already changed. They left the clinic 20 minutes later. Outside, sunlight flooded the parking lot, almost offensively bright. Elena walked toward their car without speaking. Daniel followed. "What did he mean?" "Nothing. He said there were things you needed to discuss privately." "I said it was nothing." Daniel stopped beside the car. "Elena." She turned. "What?" "What aren't you telling me?" For several seconds, she simply stared at him. Then she unlocked the car. "Not here." The words stayed with Daniel all the way home. That evening, Elena disappeared into the bedroom and closed the door. Daniel remained in the kitchen, listening to drawers opening and closing. His suspicion grew heavier with every minute. Later, while Elena showered, he saw a folder on the counter. It was old, yellowed around the edges, and marked with the name of a clinic Daniel did not recognize. He opened it. Inside were medical records. He read the first page. Then the second. His breathing slowed. A sentence near the bottom made his hands tremble. The document contained a history Elena had never mentioned. Daniel read it again, hoping he had misunderstood. He hadn't. The hallway seemed suddenly too quiet. The shower continued running behind the closed bathroom door. Daniel looked toward it, then back at the paper. 7 years of memories rushed through his mind, suddenly rearranged by a single fact. He lowered the folder, but the words on the page seemed burned into his mind. Every unanswered question from their marriage returned at once. The childhood photographs she never showed him, the relatives she rarely mentioned, the years she described only in fragments. For the first time, Daniel wondered whether he had ever known Elena at all. His voice came out barely above a whisper. "How long have you been lying to me?" The question remained in Daniel's mind long after the bathroom door opened. He did not confront Elena that night. Instead, he sat alone in the darkened living room, staring at the medical folder resting on the coffee table. He could still hear her moving upstairs, unaware that the life they had built together had already begun to look different to him. Daniel tried to remember when he had first met her. It had been 7 years earlier, on an autumn evening at a friend's birthday dinner. Elena had arrived late, carrying a small black handbag and apologizing to everyone with a smile that somehow made her lateness charming instead of rude. Daniel remembered being drawn to her immediately. She was confident without being loud, intelligent without making people feel foolish. She listened carefully, laughed easily, and seemed comfortable wherever she stood. By the end of the evening, Daniel had found excuses to remain near her. 3 weeks later, they were seeing each other almost every day. Elena had told him that she valued privacy. Daniel had considered it attractive. She did not post every detail of her life online. She disliked discussing family problems with strangers. She kept old photographs stored away instead of displaying them around the house. Daniel had noticed the gaps, but he had not considered them suspicious. When he asked about her childhood, she sometimes smiled and said, "It wasn't very interesting." When he asked about her parents, she gave short answers. When he asked why there were so few photographs from her younger years, she simply changed the subject. Daniel accepted those answers because he was falling in love. Soon, the questions became less important than everything else. They traveled together. They cooked late at night. They argued about money and movies, and whose turn it was to make coffee. They learned each other's habits until marriage seemed like the natural ending to a story that had begun without complications. Elena never told him about the life before her transition. She had been assigned male at birth, but years before meeting Daniel, she had transitioned and built her identity and adult life as a woman. The process had not been simple. It had involved fear, medical decisions, isolation, and the painful loss of people who could not accept who she was. By the time she met Daniel, Elena believed she had finally escaped that chapter. She wanted what many people wanted: a home, a husband, stability, and a life in which her past did not define every conversation. She feared that telling Daniel would make him see her differently. At first, she planned to tell him when trust between them became stronger. Then their relationship became serious. Then they became engaged. Each milestone made the truth harder to reveal. She told herself there would be a better moment. There never was. Daniel remembered none of this. Sitting alone with the folder, he remembered only the omissions. The photographs she had hidden. The questions she had avoided. The medical history she had never mentioned. Every silence that once seemed harmless now appeared deliberate. He began building a new version of their marriage in his mind, one in which every unanswered question had secretly been warning him. What frightened him most was not the secret itself, but the possibility that everyone except him had known, and that his marriage had been built around silence. The woman he loved had wanted an ordinary life. Daniel suddenly wondered whether he had ever been allowed to know the whole truth. And by morning, he had decided that he needed answers. The question he had carried from the clinic was no longer a whisper. It had become an accusation, waiting between them for the moment he finally said it aloud to her. By morning, Daniel had decided that answers would not wait. Elena found him sitting at the kitchen table, the medical folder open between his hands. He had not slept. The coffee beside him had gone cold. She stopped in the doorway. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Daniel lifted the folder. "Tell me." Elena looked at the papers and understood immediately. "I wanted to." "When?" Her voice weakened. "Before we got married." Daniel laughed once, without humor. "Before we got married?" "Yes." "But you didn't." "No." The silence that followed felt heavier than shouting. Elena sat across from him. Her hands trembled slightly. She explained slowly, stopping whenever Daniel's expression changed. She told him about the years before they met, about transitioning, about doctors, fear, rejection, and the people who had disappeared from her life. She told him that by the time Daniel entered her life, she had finally begun feeling normal. I didn't want to lie to you, she said. I was scared. Daniel stared at her. You let me marry you without knowing. I let you love me. That isn't the same thing. No, Elena whispered. It isn't. Daniel stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the neighborhood looked exactly as it always had. A woman walked a dog. A delivery truck stopped at a nearby house. Somewhere, a child laughed. The ordinary world continued while Daniel felt as though his own life had collapsed. He began replaying their marriage, their wedding night, their honeymoon, the mornings when Elena slept beside him, the arguments, the promises. Every memory seemed contaminated by a question. How had he not known? He remembered her reluctance to discuss childhood, her discomfort when he asked about old photographs, the medical appointments she attended alone, the stories that always seemed to begin somewhere in the middle. He suddenly wanted to go backward through 7 years and inspect every moment for evidence. Elena watched him unravel. I was still Elena, she said. I still loved you. Nothing about that changed. Everything changed. No. What changed is what you know about me. Daniel turned. That's supposed to make me feel better? I hoped it would make you understand. Understand what? That I was afraid you'd leave. The admission softened her voice, but hardened something inside him. Daniel had spent years believing their relationship was based on complete honesty. Now he wondered whether honesty had ever existed at all. He began using different words. He no longer said, my wife. He said, the person I thought I married. The phrase sounded strange the first time. Then he repeated it. The person I thought I married. Elena began crying. Daniel watched without moving. You're making me into someone I'm not, she said. No, he answered. I'm finally seeing you. But even he could hear the uncertainty beneath the accusation. Because somewhere beneath the anger was grief. He had not simply discovered a fact about Elena. He believed he had discovered that his memories belonged to a marriage he no longer understood. Elena reached across the table. Daniel pulled his hand away. Please, she whispered. Don't let fear destroy everything. Daniel looked at her. For a moment, he wanted to believe her. He wanted to remember the woman who had laughed beside him, held him when his father died, and kissed him before every difficult day. But the folder remained on the table. The truth was there. And Daniel had begun treating truth as if it were evidence in a crime. He picked up the papers and looked at Elena again. His anger had become quieter now, which frightened her more than shouting would have. If you kept this from me, he said, what else don't I know? The question remained unanswered, but Daniel no longer intended to wait for Elena to answer it. Over the next several days, he began searching without ever telling Elena his plans. He waited until Elena left for work before opening the storage room. He pulled boxes from shelves and carried them into the bedroom, closing the door behind him. Inside were old photographs, letters, receipts, notebooks, and medical papers Elena had apparently forgotten. Daniel studied everything. Some photographs showed Elena as a teenager, but there were surprisingly few. Others had been carefully removed from albums, leaving empty corners beneath plastic sleeves. Daniel found birthday cards addressed to a different name, then stared at them until his hands began to shake. He searched the internet for clinics mentioned in the documents. He searched old addresses. He searched names of doctors. He searched every fragment of information he could find. Each discovery produced another question. Then he found an old email account. The password was easy to guess because Elena had once used the same phrase for everything. Daniel entered it and began reading. Most messages were ordinary. Work, bills, appointments. Then he found a name he did not recognize. Adrian Vale. The earliest message was years old. Daniel read it twice. Adrian had known Elena before the marriage. More importantly, Elena had trusted him with the truth. One message contained a sentence that stopped Daniel cold. "You don't have to explain yourself to me. I already know who you are." Daniel leaned back from the screen. Who was Adrian? Why had Elena told him? And why had Daniel never heard his name? He searched again. Adrian appeared in photographs, standing beside Elena at a small gathering years before Daniel had met her. In another picture, they were laughing together outside a cafe. There was nothing romantic in the images, but Daniel no longer saw photographs as innocent. He saw evidence. That evening, Elena noticed something different in him. "You're quiet. I'm tired." She studied him. "Did something happen?" "No." The lie came easily. After that, Daniel began watching her phone. At first, he only noticed when messages arrived. Then he started asking who had written them. "Who was that?" "A co-worker." "What did they want?" "Daniel, it was nothing." His questions became more frequent. "Where are you going? Who will be there? When will you be home?" Elena eventually confronted him. "You're checking up on me constantly. I worry about you." "No." "You're monitoring me." Daniel's expression hardened. "Why does it bother you if you have nothing to hide?" Elena looked at him for a long moment. "Because I'm your wife, not your prisoner." The word stayed with him. Prisoner. That night, Daniel searched for Adrian again. He found an old number. He saved it. Then he opened Elena's phone while she slept and looked for the same name. When he found it, jealousy replaced curiosity. Adrian had known Elena before him. Adrian had known the truth. Perhaps Adrian had known every secret. Perhaps Elena had trusted Adrian because he understood the person Daniel had supposedly never been allowed to know. Daniel imagined conversations between them. He imagined private meetings. He imagined Elena telling Adrian things she had never told him. None of it was evidence. But Daniel no longer needed evidence. He needed a story. And Adrian had just become part of it. By the end of the week, Daniel was checking Elena's location, reading messages over her shoulder, and asking questions before she could offer explanations. Elena began withdrawing from him. Daniel interpreted the distance as proof. He did not understand that his suspicion was creating the secrecy he feared. The secret was no longer simply Elena's past. It was becoming Daniel's obsession. And somewhere inside that obsession, the question changed. He was no longer asking what Elena had hidden. He was deciding who else had helped her hide it. The number Daniel had saved belonged to Adrian Vale. He waited 3 days before calling. When Adrian answered, Daniel said only, "We need to talk." They met at a quiet cafe across town. Adrian arrived alone, carrying the cautious expression of someone who already understood why he had been summoned. Daniel did not offer him a seat. "How long have you known?" Adrian looked at him. "Known what?" "Don't do that." Daniel placed a photograph on the table. It showed Adrian and Elena together years earlier. "You knew about her past." Adrian sat down slowly. "Yes." The admission hit Daniel harder than he expected. "How long?" "Before you met her." Daniel stared at him. "So you knew everything." "I knew what Elena trusted me enough to tell me." "And you said nothing." "It wasn't my story to tell." Daniel laughed bitterly. "You watched me marry her." "I watched Elena marry someone she loved." "You knew she was keeping a major part of her life from me." Adrian's expression hardened. "You're making this about yourself." "It is about me." "No." "That's exactly the problem." Daniel leaned forward. "What does that mean?" "It means you're acting as if Elena's past was something you were entitled to possess. She was my wife. She was still a person." The word silenced Daniel. Adrian continued quietly. "She was terrified that someone would discover her history and decide that everything about her was a lie. She didn't want to be reduced to one chapter of her life. Daniel's jaw tightened. So you helped her deceive me. I protected her confidence. You lied by omission? No, Adrian said. She kept something private. Daniel stood. Do you know what it feels like to discover that the person you married kept something like this from you? Adrian looked directly at him. I know what it feels like to watch someone you care about become afraid of the person standing beside her. Daniel froze. Be careful. I am being careful. The confrontation ended without resolution, but Adrian's final words followed Daniel home. That evening, Elena was waiting in the living room. She had found the open storage boxes. Photographs covered the floor. Old documents lay across the table. Daniel's laptop remained open to pages he had searched. She understood immediately. You went through my things. Daniel said nothing. You searched my accounts. I needed answers. You called Adrian. Daniel looked away. Elena's face changed. Something inside her seemed to settle. Not anger. Fear. I asked you to give me time. You've had years. I gave you the truth. You gave me a version. Elena stepped backward. Daniel noticed the movement. For the first time, he understood that she was afraid of him. The realization should have stopped him. Instead, panic rose inside him. Where are you going? I'm staying with a friend tonight. No. Elena looked at him. You don't get to decide that. Daniel felt something colder than anger. He was losing control. The thought terrified him. Elena reached for her bag. Daniel moved toward her, then stopped. She watched him carefully. Her voice was barely audible. I don't think I'm safe with you anymore. Daniel stood motionless as she walked past him. For the first time since the discovery, the secret mattered less than the possibility that Elena might actually leave. He wanted to stop her, but he could not find the words. Instead, he watched her collect the things she needed, moving. Daniel remembered their marriage, when her departure from a room had meant nothing more than a moment. Now the same movement felt like abandonment. Elena opened the front door. Daniel, she said without turning, please don't follow me. The door closed softly. He remained completely alone among the photographs. Then he looked down at the old photograph of Elena and Adrian. His fear returned as anger, and this time, it had nowhere left to go. The house was quiet after Elena left. Daniel spent the night moving from room to room, unable to sleep. By morning, the anger had settled into something heavier. He told himself he needed to fix things, but beneath that thought was another fear. Elena had finally decided she could live without him. When Elena returned, she did not come back to argue. She came for her belongings. Daniel watched from the hallway as she placed clothes into a small suitcase. She moved carefully, choosing only what she needed. A few shirts, toiletries, a photograph. Her hands were steady, but her eyes remained fixed on the floor. Where are you going? Daniel asked. I don't know yet. Adrian? She stopped. Daniel saw the answer before she spoke. He's helping me find somewhere safe. The word safe struck him harder than anything else. You contacted him? Yes. When? Last night. Daniel's breathing changed. Elena reached for her phone. Daniel looked at the screen. A message from Adrian was visible. Call me when you're ready. I'll help you. Daniel stared at it. So this is what you've been planning. Elena shook her head. I'm leaving because I'm afraid of you. No. You're leaving because he wants you. That isn't true. Then why him? Because he knows what I'm going through. Daniel laughed bitterly. Of course he does. Elena closed the suitcase. You need to stop. Stop what? This. She gestured toward the room, the photographs, the documents, and the phone in his hand. "You've turned my entire life into an investigation. You made it an investigation. I was scared. And I was lied to. You were never entitled to every part of me before you were ready to hear it." Daniel stepped closer. "I gave you 7 years. And I loved you for 7 years. Then why wasn't that enough?" Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Because love doesn't erase fear." Daniel stared at her. "You stole those years from me." "I didn't steal anything. You decided what I was allowed to know. I was afraid you'd see me differently." "I do." The words fell between them. Elena looked away. Daniel's anger suddenly shifted. Was it Adrian? She looked back. "What? Were you with him?" "No. You trusted him with everything. That doesn't mean what you think. Were you ever together?" Elena said nothing. Daniel waited. "Answer me." She remained silent. The silence became unbearable. In Daniel's mind, it expanded until it filled the room. The walls seemed closer. The air felt thin. He could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the clock ticking somewhere behind him, Elena breathing only a few feet away. "You won't answer." "I don't owe you an answer to every question. You owe me the truth. I have given you the truth." "No." Daniel's voice rose. "You've given me pieces." Elena stepped toward the door. Daniel moved in front of it. "Move. Just tell me." I said move. His heart was pounding. He could feel years of anger, shame, confusion, and fear pressing against one another inside him. He wanted to stop the moment from happening, yet some part of him seemed determined to make it happen. Elena tried to pass. Daniel grabbed her arm. She pulled away. "Don't touch me." For 1 second, he let go. Then everything became confused. There was shouting. A sudden movement. The suitcase struck the floor. A chair scraped backward. Daniel remembered Elena's face, her eyes wide with fear. Then his memory broke into fragments. His hands. Her voice. The sound of something falling. A terrible silence. Daniel stood motionless. Elena lay on the floor. He stared at her as though his mind refused to understand what his eyes were seeing. The room had become impossibly quiet. He waited for her to move. She did not. He whispered her name. Nothing. Daniel looked toward the door. Then at the suitcase lying open beside Elena. Clothes were scattered across the floor. One sleeve hung over the edge. A photograph had slipped halfway out. She had been leaving. That was the thought that returned. Not the argument. Not the struggle. Not the silence. She had been leaving. Daniel's breathing became shallow. He looked at the suitcase again and understood, with horror, what he had done to her. He looked at Elena again, and something inside him hardened around the reality he could not accept. If she was gone, she could never leave him. The thought arrived quietly, coldly, completely. Now nobody can leave me. Daniel did not call immediately. He stood over her, unable to move, while the house seemed to hold its breath. The clock continued ticking. Somewhere outside, a car passed, completely unaware of what had happened inside. Daniel looked at the front door and imagined Elena walking through it again. Then reality returned, and he understood that whatever happened next would determine the story he told about this night. He knew once police arrived, their private disaster would become evidence for investigators to examine. For several minutes, he remained beside Elena, listening to the silence that had replaced her voice. The thought that nobody could leave him had been followed by another. Nobody could know what had happened. Then panic returned. Daniel reached for his phone and dialed emergency services. His voice shook when the operator answered. "My wife is hurt." He paused. "We had an argument. She fell." By the time officers arrived, Daniel was sitting on the floor several feet from Elena. He looked pale and confused. His hands trembled. The first officer entered carefully, followed by paramedics. Questions came quickly. One paramedic knelt beside Elena while another checked the room. Daniel watched their faces and knew before anyone spoke that there was nothing they could do. Still, hearing the confirmation made the house feel colder. "What happened?" Daniel looked toward Elena. "We were arguing." "About what?" He swallowed. "Her past." The officers exchanged a glance. Daniel began explaining. He told them about the doctor's appointment, the medical records, the secret Elena had kept from him. He described the shock of discovering that she had been assigned male at birth and said he had felt as though his entire marriage had suddenly become a lie. "I didn't know who I was married to," he said. The detective who arrived minutes later, Mara Collins, listened without interrupting. Daniel expected her to understand. Instead, she asked, "What happened after you found out?" "We argued." "How often had you been arguing before today?" Daniel hesitated. "Sometimes." "How often?" He looked down. "More recently." Collins noticed the hesitation. She also noticed details Daniel seemed determined to ignore. The scene did not immediately resemble the accident he described. There were inconsistencies in the room, marks suggesting a struggle, and the suitcase lying open nearby. Daniel kept returning to Elena's secret. "She lied to me for 7 years. Collins wrote something down. "Was she trying to leave you?" Daniel said nothing. That silence mattered. At the station, investigators began reconstructing the weeks before Elena's death. Daniel sat beneath fluorescent lights, repeating the same explanation until even he seemed to believe it. He insisted that he had been overwhelmed, that he had never intended to hurt her, and that the discovery had destroyed everything he understood about his life. They examined Daniel's phone. Messages showed that he had been monitoring Elena's movements, questioning her constantly, and contacting people from her past. There were searches about Adrian. There were messages asking Elena where she had been and who she had spoken to. Neighbors were interviewed. One remembered hearing shouting several times during the previous month. Another recalled seeing Elena leave the house carrying a bag. Then Adrian arrived with information of his own. He told investigators that Elena had contacted him because she was afraid and needed somewhere safe to stay. He provided messages showing that she had been preparing to leave Daniel. Collins read them carefully. The picture was changing. Daniel had discovered Elena's secret at the doctor's office, but the evidence suggested that the violence had not begun there. The secrecy had triggered his rage. It had not created it. When investigators returned to the house, they searched the bedroom again. One officer opened the closet. Behind several hanging clothes sat Elena's packed suitcase. Inside were clothes, toiletries, documents, and a photograph. Everything she needed to leave. Collins stared at it. Daniel had said the argument happened suddenly. The suitcase suggested otherwise. Elena had been planning her escape. And now there was nowhere left for her to go. The suitcase changed the direction of the investigation. Until then, Daniel's story had depended on one idea. Discovery had destroyed him. He wanted investigators to believe the murder was the sudden result of learning Elena's deepest secret. But the evidence on her phone told a different story. Detectives began recovering deleted messages, photographs, emails, and conversations from the months before her death. They examined bank records and purchases, looking for signs of separation. They reviewed calls between Elena and friends, co-workers, and Adrian. Slowly, the final months of the marriage emerged. Elena had not suddenly decided to leave after the doctor's appointment. She had been thinking about leaving for months. Several messages described Daniel's behavior. He questioned where she went. He demanded explanations for ordinary delays. He became angry when she spent time with friends. He checked her phone and accused her of hiding things. One conversation stopped the investigators. Elena had written that she still loved Daniel, but she no longer felt comfortable around him. Another message said she was afraid that confronting him about the marriage would make things worse. Then investigators recovered a deleted message. "I don't know how to tell him without becoming afraid of what he'll do." Collins read the sentence twice. It changed the meaning of everything. Elena had not simply been protecting a secret. She had been protecting herself. More messages revealed something even more complicated. Elena had never described Daniel as entirely cruel. She remembered his kindness. She spoke about the years when he made her feel safe. She told Adrian that she still loved the man she had married, even though she no longer recognized the man he was becoming. That contradiction mattered. It meant the marriage had not been a simple story of victim and monster. There had been love. There had been happiness. There had also been fear. Daniel continued insisting that Elena's secret had caused the tragedy. "She lied to me," he told Collins. "Everything changed when I found out." Collins placed printed messages on the table. "You were already monitoring her before you discovered those records." Daniel looked away. "You were questioning her movements." Silence. "You contacted Adrian because you believed he knew something." Daniel's jaw tightened. "And Elena was preparing to leave." Daniel finally looked up. "She was leaving because she lied." "No," Collins said. "She was leaving because she was afraid." Daniel shook his head. "You don't understand." "I understand the evidence." She pushed the deleted message toward him. "You didn't kill her because she had a secret. You killed her because you couldn't control what that secret meant." Daniel stared at the words. For the first time, he had no explanation. The certainty that had carried him through the interrogation began to fracture. He had believed the secret was the crime. Now the evidence suggested it had only exposed the real one. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Daniel's eyes moved from the message to the table. He remembered Elena standing beside the suitcase, asking him not to follow her. He remembered her expression when she said she no longer felt safe. Until now, he had interpreted that fear as an insult, another accusation against him. Now he wondered whether she had been telling him exactly what she meant. Collins watched the realization arrive slowly. "You knew she was afraid," she said. Daniel swallowed. "I didn't think she meant me, but she did." He lowered his head. Outside the interview room, investigators continued building the timeline, one message at a time. And every recovered message made Daniel's version harder to defend at night. The evidence left Daniel with fewer places to hide, so he began changing the story. At first, he insisted Elena's death had been an accident. They had argued, he said, and everything happened too quickly. He claimed he had never intended to hurt her. Then the details shifted. Daniel told investigators Elena had become angry and attacked him. He said he had only defended himself. When detectives pointed out inconsistencies, he changed his explanation again. This time, he described a psychological collapse. He said discovering Elena's past had destroyed his understanding of their marriage. He had felt humiliated, betrayed, and emotionally trapped. According to Daniel, the revelation had shattered something inside him. The investigators listened. They did not interrupt. They simply compared every new statement with the evidence. The contradictions accumulated. Daniel had searched for information about Elena's past several days before the murder. He had searched for Adrian's name. He had tracked Elena's movements. He had confronted Adrian in person. He had also researched divorce lawyers. That discovery was especially important. If Daniel had truly been incapable of thinking clearly after the doctor's appointment, why had he been researching divorce? Why had he been planning what separation might look like? Why had he been watching Elena? And why had he deleted messages from his phone after she died? None of those actions proved exactly what had happened inside his mind, but together they showed something Daniel's changing story could not erase. He had been spiraling long before the final argument. The detective placed the evidence in front of him. "You keep telling us this happened in one moment." Daniel stared at the table. "It felt like one moment, but it wasn't." Daniel looked up. "You don't know what it felt like." "No," the detective said. "But we know what you did before it happened." Daniel became silent. Inside his own mind, however, the story was becoming something else. He began remembering himself as the injured person. He remembered the years before the revelation. He remembered believing his marriage was honest. He remembered loving Elena without knowing the part of her history she had kept private. Those memories became more powerful than the evidence. In Daniel's mind, Elena had not simply hidden something. She had taken years from him. She had changed the meaning of his life without his permission. He began describing himself as someone who had been emotionally murdered long before Elena died. That belief allowed him to avoid another, more painful truth. A person could feel betrayed and still choose not to become violent. A person could feel humiliated and still walk away. A person could discover something devastating and still leave another human being alive. Daniel had not been forced into the final moment. He had made choices. But inside the story he was creating for himself, those choices were disappearing. He was becoming the victim. And the more he repeated that version, the more he seemed to believe it. The detective watched him carefully. "Being hurt does not give you ownership over another person's life." Daniel's eyes hardened. "You have no idea what she took from me." "I know what you took from her." Daniel looked away. To him, Elena's secret remained the beginning of everything. To investigators, the real story had started much earlier. The interrogation began. Daniel was brought into the room without handcuffs. He sat across from Detective Collins beneath fluorescent lights. Collins brought no photographs of Elena, no medical records, no messages, only a folder containing Daniel's choices. "I don't want to discuss Elena's identity," she said, "and I don't want to argue about whether you felt betrayed." Daniel stared at her. "Then what do you want?" "The truth about what you did." Daniel said nothing. Collins opened the folder. "Why did you follow Elena?" "I was worried." "Why did you monitor her phone?" "I needed answers." "Why did you confront Adrian?" "Because he knew things I didn't." "Why did you research divorce lawyers?" Daniel looked away. "And why did you stop Elena from leaving?" His expression changed. "I didn't mean to stop her." "She told you to move." Daniel swallowed. "Yes." "She told you she was afraid." "Yes." "And you still moved toward her." Daniel's hands tightened together. Collins turned another page. "Why did you wait before calling emergency services?" "I was in shock." "You had enough awareness to think about what would happen next." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know what to do." "You knew she was dead." Daniel closed his eyes. The room was briefly silent. Then he whispered, "I knew." Collins waited. Daniel looked at the table. "When I found out about her past, I felt like everything had been taken from me." "Your marriage?" "My certainty." He looked up. "I thought I knew her. I thought I knew our life. Then suddenly there were years I couldn't explain." "So you needed explanations." "I needed everything." The words came faster now. "I wanted to know where she had been. Who knew? What she had told them. What she hadn't told me. I kept thinking there had to be another secret." Collins listened. "I couldn't stop searching," Daniel continued. "Every answer created another question. I couldn't sleep. I watched her phone. I followed her. I checked everything. Why? Because I couldn't stand not knowing." Daniel's voice broke. "I wanted certainty." Collins leaned forward. "And control?" Daniel stared at her. After a long silence, he nodded. Yes. He wiped his face. I wanted to control the story. I wanted to know what had happened before me. I wanted to know what was happening without me. I wanted to make sure she could never leave me with unanswered questions. Collins remained silent. Daniel's breathing became uneven. Then he said the sentence he had been avoiding. I knew she was still the woman I married. His eyes lowered. I just couldn't forgive her for having a life I couldn't control. Collins looked at him for several seconds. Then you weren't protecting your marriage. Daniel looked up. You were protecting yourself from the truth. Something inside him finally collapsed. Daniel quietly covered his face and began to cry. Not the controlled tears he had shown during earlier interrogations. This time, there was no explanation ready. No accusation. No story in which Elena's secret could carry the blame. There was only the unbearable recognition that his obsession had become a choice. And in that room, for the first time, Daniel stopped trying to escape what he had done. The confession did not end the case. It began the part of the story that would outlive Daniel. He was charged with Elena's murder and taken into custody as prosecutors prepared the case. The evidence had become a timeline, monitoring, threats, confrontation, escape, struggle, and the delayed call for help. Daniel's lawyers argued that he had been psychologically overwhelmed by discovering Elena's past. But investigators had established something more important. Pain could explain emotion. It could not erase responsibility for a choice. Adrian gave his final statement. He spoke, describing Elena as someone who had spent years afraid that people would reduce her entire identity to the circumstances of her birth. Her greatest fear wasn't being discovered, he said. It was being treated as if everything she was had been a lie. Those words stayed with investigators. They also stayed with the doctor who had examined Elena that morning. The doctor later wondered whether anything could have prevented the chain of events that followed. But the doctor understood the truth. Elena's medical history had been private. The murder was not caused by that privacy. It was caused by what Daniel chose to do after learning something he had not expected to learn. That distinction became central to the case. In court, Elena was no longer a secret. She was remembered by friends, Adrian, and those who knew her, and those who had witnessed the fear growing inside her last months. Daniel had wanted the world to believe that one revelation destroyed his marriage. The evidence showed something more complicated. His marriage had already been damaged by suspicion, control, and fear. The revelation exposed the fracture. It did not create it. Months later, Elena's side of the bedroom remained untouched. Her closet was partly empty. The suitcase she had packed on the night she planned to leave was gone from the house, taken into evidence, and eventually returned to those who had known her. But the room still carried the shape of her absence. Daniel had spent months searching for the truth about Elena. In the end, he discovered something about himself that he had never wanted to know. Her secret had not killed her. His obsession with what that secret meant to him had. Daniel thought he had murdered the secret that had destroyed his marriage. In the end, he had only destroyed the woman who trusted him with her life.